I've been tricked, fooled, beguiled, misled, deceived, hoodwinked, taken for a ride. Whatever synonym you want to use, insert it here. It's applicable. I have been catfished by a game trailer of all things. And it's not like I don't know any better. I've been following this industry for years. This is what they do. Take all the best parts of a game, slap it together all nice and sexy like, making you want it. Then when you take it home, it is not what you thought it would be. I thought it was better than this, but apparently I'm not. Indika, you got me. You got me good. I was just looking for a good time. Nothing too serious, just a nice little weekend of fun. And there you are. Bright yellow halo. You caught my eye instantly. These nuns laughing. Why are they laughing at you? What did you do? What's going on here? I had to look a little bit further. I see these trailers, and I don't know what the hell I just saw. What is this bonkers nonsense? It wasn't just me. I sent it to a couple of friends of mine, and their sentiments were more or less the same. What did I just watch? I had to find out. I had to know what this was all about. I was expecting some off-the-wall weirdness. But what I actually got was something else entirely. Although, I didn't even really notice it at first. You tricky little bird, you. You had me duped from the beginning. You made it seem like you were going to hold up your end of the bargain. You were going to be all weird. It all starts off appropriately enough. You slowly falling, catching these little golden hexagons, forming a melody as you fall, in a 2D pixel art style of all things, that abruptly ends with you crashing into a table and the game begins proper. From the beginning to the end, the whole thing has an undercurrent of weird to it. Odd camera angles, tiny men in pajamas coming out of a nun's mouth, comically oversized fish, a quirky soundtrack, this kind of broken jazz, kind of 16-bit thing that feels completely out of place with the scenes, jarring tonal shifts, switching you to a different gameplay style, out of nowhere, these 2D platforming segments that serve as flashback sequences to Indika's troubled past, an overabundance of religious iconography to the point of absurdity. You speak to the devil, he talks to you. Is it actually the devil? Is it a voice in your head? It's unclear. He taunts you, he teases you, presents logical fallacies, tests your faith, sometimes to the point where it becomes an environmental puzzle where prayer is a gameplay mechanic. The whole thing, top to bottom, reeks of, look at me, I'm odd. To the point that when I beat the game, I got to the end and it just stopped out of nowhere and the rolling credits start. I was all like, what the hell was that? What the fuck did I just play? And I thought I had a good idea of what I wanted to say. I thought I was going to get on this microphone and talk about just how weird and quirky this game was. It's just that something didn't feel right. There was something off about all of this when I really stopped to think about it. I had to play through it again. I really enjoyed it, so I was fine replaying it. I just had to try to make sense of my experience with this thing. Something didn't add up. My mind was calling bullshit on all of this weirdness. Some of it made sense. The odd imagery, the discordant music, it gave everything an uncanny and uncomfortable feel that felt right in line with the overarching themes of the story. A crisis of faith. Other things didn't make any sense to me why they were the way they were, especially some of the more quote-unquote video gamey elements of it. The pixel art flashback sequences and their retro-style mini-games, platforming segments, or parts that vaguely resemble Pac-Man or Frogger. A bike race against your dad that reminded me of RC Pro-Am. Or the leveling system? Why is it even there? You collect all these points hitting objective markers or finding all these religious icons scattered throughout the map, but it does nothing, goes nowhere, and is absolutely worthless. The game itself tells you not to even bother with any of it. What was even the point of any of it? The leveling system didn't need to exist. Literally at all. It did nothing. Like nothing. And the flashback sequences? They could have just as easily been done using the absolutely gorgeous in-game graphics of the real-time segments. So, why? Why? What are you doing with all of this? What are you trying to say with this? I know you're trying to say something. This game does have something to say. I noticed that fairly quickly. But what is it? It wasn't until my third time around, which, by the way, was an absolute joy and a breeze to play through, especially now that I knew for a fact all of these collectibles and this leveling system, it was all superfluous garbage. My second time around, I went out of my way to search every corner, find every single hidden icon, and you don't even get a trophy for it, which a lot of games will just do for the sake of it. Nothing. Worthless. Pointless. But I do think I finally started to understand where they were going with all of this. The pointless collectibles, the leveling system, the 2D graphics. This is just speculation on my part. I'm not entirely certain even as I sit here recording this. I think it might be some sort of meta commentary. The game poking fun at itself for being a video game in the first place, and having a little bit of fun at the player's expense along the way. That's why the collectibles are there. It makes sense when you think about it. So many games add them for their own sake, causing the player to search every nook and cranny, collecting junk that has zero gameplay value and gives you no real true reward except having found it. Or the leveling system that goes nowhere, with so many video games nowadays feeling the need to have a leveling system in a game that has no need for one. It makes so much sense when I think about it. The 2D graphics, the mini-games, shining a light, highlighting that despite the overall serious tone of the story, this is still just a silly video game. Now, it is entirely possible I may have pulled all of this out of my ass because I had to understand why it was like this. So I was trying to find meaning where there was none. It's just that I don't think so. This game is clever. It knows what it's doing. This couldn't have been accidental. It had to have been deliberate. And it's not like it doesn't drop a couple of clues here and there. Right at the beginning of the game, you are performing this incredibly mundane, tedious task that the game ties in directly to the plot. But there was this one moment right near the end that solidified it for me. This one environmental puzzle where you use a massive crane to move a chunk of building so you could get across a rooftop gap and enter a monastery. And just before they are about to sneak in through the window of said monastery, Indika stops to ask her companion if this is okay to do, if she is permitted to do this. I didn't notice this until my third playthrough, and I laughed so hard. She had just finished causing God knows how much property damage solving this puzzle, but now stops to wonder if it's against the rules to go through a window? Oh, that did it for me. This is not accidental. That is video games for you right there. Absolutely idiotic puzzles that make no sense whatsoever. And the game knows. That is obvious. All of that weirdness, there is a point to it. It makes perfect sense that that's what they would put front and center in their trailers to entice the potential buyer. And it did its job on me. After seeing that, I was already prepped for the weirdness. So by the end of it, all I noticed was the weirdness. But I couldn't shake that feeling that something was off, and I finally identified it. With regards to all of this video gamey stuff, this maybe not meta commentary thing they did, it is completely at odds with the actual story itself, which isn't weird at all. It's actually pretty straightforward. I'm not the biggest fan of saying much about a game's story, especially when the story is the point of the game, so I will keep it to its basic minimum. A nun going through a crisis of faith. The devil has been speaking to her, tempting her, teasing her, making her question her very beliefs to the core, is sent on a simple errand to deliver a letter. Along the way, she encounters an escaped fugitive that is on his own mission because God has spoken to him and he has decided to change his ways, and they form an ironic bond through their opposing viewpoints. Then stuff happens. What actually goes on in this plot isn't really all that relevant. It's very interesting, but it merely acts as a vehicle to pose questions. Questions at the very heart of faith itself. The nature of good and evil. What makes something good? What makes something evil? How evil is it? Is it more evil than this? Less evil than that? Is this even quantifiable? Who determines any of this anyways? Is it God? Is it the devil? Or is it just our way of rationalizing our decisions? Decisions. The nature of free will. Do we truly have autonomy over our choices, or are the choices we make byproducts of the circumstances presented to us? Loving God. Is it possible to truly love God unconditionally? Or has He placed us in such an impossible position that we're essentially left with no choice, or else? These are questions that, while altogether not entirely original, countless philosophers and theologians have mulled over this for God knows how long. Pardon the pun. But the way it's presented and how it flows through the story is incredibly well done. The story is serious, kind of sad at times, a bit dark. This is what didn't sit right with me. The strangeness is there. I felt it. It is an odd experience. But it's almost as if it's odd because it just wanted to be, not because it needed to be. At its very core, there's nothing odd whatsoever about what actually happens in the game. Just the way it's presented. It's like some art house film that decided to go all avant-garde and shit on us when it would have held up just fine on its own merits. It's almost as if they didn't have enough confidence in the premise itself, so they decided to add all this extra try-hard, edgelordy things when it did not need it. Is this the state that we're in, video games industry, where a well-put-together, well-told, thoughtful story has to be needlessly zhuzhed up with all this extra goofy shit for anyone to pay attention? Are we that far gone? Indika, you were just fine being who you are. The extra stuff was truly not necessary. And unfortunately, I have to be honest with myself. I would have likely not even looked in your direction if it wasn't for how you presented yourself. If it wasn't for that strangeness, I would have disregarded you as yet another dime a dozen narrative-driven adventure walking simulator. And there is much more to this, much more to you than that. There is true genius here, but I'm glad you tricked me. If it wasn't for that strangeness, I would not have had such a memorable experience. Something I highly recommend. But for any of you out there that have seen the trailers, don't let it fool you like it did me. This game is nowhere near as strange as it makes you think it is. The strangeness is just the icing on the cake. Although, I'm not entirely sure if that icing makes the cake taste better or just leaves a funny aftertaste. I will have to play through it again because I am just not sure.